Welcome to today's webinar, everybody. Carly Hansen from Community Legal Centres Queensland hosting for you. And today we're talking about police responses to domestic violence in the LGBTI community. So while there have been many positive steps taken to raise awareness of and improve responses to DV in Queensland in recent years, there's still, as we know, significant underreporting of domestic violence among the lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans and intersex community, and a lot of work to be done to properly provide appropriate and targeted support services and better police responses to LGBTI victims. So today we've got Senior Constable Ben Bjarnsen, who's the Queensland Police LGBTI Liaison Officer at the Fortitude Valley Station, and he recently completed a Churchill Fellowship with the aim of better understanding DV issues within the LGBTI communities and capturing best practice in policing responses. So today Ben will talk about his research, go through some of the dynamics of LGBTI domestic violence and propose some factors that might prevent people identifying DV in their relationship and reporting the violence to police and support services. They'll also provide some guidance on how support services can be more inclusive of LGBTI people, particularly victims of violence. Now, it would be remiss of me to not fail to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're holding today's webinar. So in Brisbane, they're the Turrbal and the Yagara people. I wish to pay respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the important role that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders continue to play in our society. So as today's webinar is being viewed by people throughout Queensland and Australia, I'd also like to pay respect to the traditional owners of the land throughout the country and extend a warm welcome to any First Australians listening today. And also point out that we know that domestic violence disproportionately impacts Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. So like to acknowledge that as well. So I'll hand over to Ben shortly and let him talk a little bit more about himself. Today's webinar is being recorded. We'll have the recording available to download later today or early tomorrow. You should have received the PowerPoints yesterday afternoon. They were emailed out to everyone who had registered at that point, or you can download them from the handouts section on the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll have questions at the end, and there are two ways you can ask questions. So you can press the button that looks like a hand. We can unmute you and you can ask your question via your microphone, or the easier way is you can just type your question into the question box on the GoToWebinar control panel and we'll read that one out for Ben. So we also have a poll today, so make sure you put your responses into the poll when it comes up on the screen, and you'll hear from me probably around that time when we do the polls, but for now I'll hand over to Ben. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks very much. So my name is Ben Bjarnsen. I'm a general duties police officer. So I work in sort of first response in the Fortitude Valley division in Brisbane here. I also coordinate the Queensland Police Service LGBTI support network, which is an internal network for police officers and staff members. And I'm the district coordinator for the Queensland Police LGBTI liaison officer program. So we've got about 110 liaison officers from throughout the state, and that's undertaken aside from their normal duties. So for me, for example, I'm a general duties officer, but then on the side I do liaison officer roles, and that the other officers can be from anywhere from detectives to drug squad to any sort of role, and it's just a role that they undertake as a volunteer. So a bit of overview from, I'll tell you a bit more about me so you've got a bit of history. So I've worked as a police officer for 11 years. I worked in urban stations and rural areas. I've worked out in Roma and Tara previously in Ipswich, and have witnessed DV and LGBTI communities in all of those different places. The last 4 years there's been 2 homicides in my division in the Fortitude Valley, and both of those homicides have been LGBTI domestic violence related. In 2016 I received a fellowship from the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust and travelled overseas to investigate ways that police can enhance the way they respond to DV and LGBTI communities. So while I was over there, I attended 7 police departments and 15 community support organisations throughout the USA, Canada, England, Scotland and the Netherlands, and gained an insight into issues surrounding DV in LGBTI communities and the strategies used by those places to improve the way police respond to the issue, the way they develop connections with support agencies and enable their frontline police to have more meaningful and effective relations with LGBTI communities. So today we'll just go through a bit of the LGBTI history in Australia specifically, domestic violence and LGBTI relationships, some myths that surround DV and LGBTI communities, why there may be a hesitance in reporting or seeking support, and a bit about the LGBTI Liaison Officer Program. So in Australia, the sort of history goes back to 1533. Thankfully, I won't take too long there. But Britain passes the Buggery Act, which outlawed anal sex and bestiality, and that was then brought to Australia in 1788. In 1949, Queen Victoria downgraded the anal sex law from a crime punishable by death to punishable by 20 years imprisonment. And sort of a bit more recent history, 72, the South Australian police are suspected for being responsible for the death of a gay academic who was thrown into the river, which focuses the attention in the state on gay rights and police violence. And that was sort of started a bit of movement around Australia as well. In 1975, police raided the home of a Victorian gay couple and interrogated them, and they're charged with committing homosexual acts and deported to South Australia. 76 and 77, police in Victoria arrest more than 100 men for homosexuality in a summer law enforcement campaign, which includes sending police to pose as gay men to entrap offenders. And unfortunately, that actually happened in Queensland too. There was allegations of entrapment by members of the Queensland Police, and allegations that there were threats of outing and violence against gay men, which was reported in the sort of 80s and 90s. And in Queensland, some men were still being arrested for consensual sex acts until the legislation changed in 1990. 78, we'll go back to Sydney. 53 people were arrested at the first gay and lesbian Mardi Gras parade. And those are sort of some of the images there that still resonate with a lot of the LGBTI community, especially the older generation, of what the police are like and what they sort of expect police to be like, still some people these days, unfortunately. So 1985, we'll go to Queensland passes legislation banning bars from serving alcohol to perverts, deviants, child molesters and drug users, which was a group likely intended to include LGBTI communities. 1992, the gay panic defence succeeds in downgrading a murder charge to manslaughter, and it's followed by more than 10 similar cases in New South Wales alone over the next few years. 92, the government removes a ban on same-sex attracted men and women serving in the military, and in 1997, the gay panic defence is upheld by the High Court of Australia. So, in 1975, homosexuality was decriminalised in South Australia. In 76, in South Australia, basically with all the different states, the age of consent was different, ranging from anywhere between 21 years to 18 years. And obviously for vaginal, it was 16 years in most of the states at that time. 1980 and 81, Victoria. 83 for the Northern Territory. 84 for New South Wales. 1990 for WA, but they also brought in legislation where it became an offence to promote or encourage homosexual behaviour or in primary or secondary schools. 1990, sodomy was decriminalised in Queensland and the age of consent remained at 18. It wasn't until 1992, which is still scary, that the World Health Organization removed homosexuality from being classified as a mental disorder. And eventually in 1997, Tasmania caught up and decriminalised homosexual acts. So, DV and LGBTI communities, media campaigns, support services and police generally discuss and make policy about DV as a heterosexual problem, with victims of DV being females and children. And whilst it's acknowledged that this group represents the vast majority of victims, it's clear that there's tens of thousands of LGBTI victims of DV who have got inadequate support services, aren't aware that they're victims, or are too scared to seek out support due to their sexuality or gender identity. It's also been noted that there's a significant role that drugs can play in DV in LGBTI communities, especially in gay men. This can prevent crimes or DV from being reported, as the victims might not want police coming to their address if there's a chance they may be prosecuted for drug use. Another one is not being out of the closet, so to speak, which can also play a significant role in DV, as it can not only cause stress in the relationship if one partner is out and one's not, but there can also be threats of outing to family and friends, which can occur. And if people aren't out, there's a significant stress which can be caused by not feeling accepted by the community and also in their workplace. LGBTI people can also have stresses of being out at work and could encounter issues with family when it comes to their relationships and their religion and their beliefs of their families. And further, people suffering from a mental health condition or substance abuse are less likely to reach out for support, and therefore the abuse in relationships can worsen. And obviously, LGBTI communities have got a higher rate of mental health issues and substance abuse, unfortunately, than the general population.
So you should see the poll up there, and thank you to the people that have voted so far. So we might just close up those responses now and share those with everyone. So as Ben mentioned, really all of those options that you can see on the screen could potentially prevent people in LGBTI communities from seeking support or help. So I'll just close that poll up. Thank you.
So some of the myths, there's a lot of myths that surround domestic violence in LGBTI communities. One that comes up a bit is domestic violence is mainly a straight issue and doesn't occur often in LGBTI relationships. One is it really isn't intimate partner violence when two gay men fight. It's just boys being boys, and a man should be able to defend himself. That one in particular resonates a bit for me because I grew up, I went to a all-boys boarding school, and it was commonplace for guys to have fights with their friends, physical fights quite regularly, and that was just seen to be normal behaviour. So that can then be transferred over to relationships because people sort of see it to be two guys fighting. It's a normal thing. When it comes down to it, that's not a thing that should be happening in relationships. Might be acceptable in a schoolyard, but when it comes to relationships, it's not. But unfortunately, there's that sort of link there, and that's why a lot of people think that myth's actually true. This is another one. Violence in lesbian relationships is just a catfight. That's another one that's quite common. People think that being two women, it's just equal, and therefore it's just a catfight. Incidents of domestic violence are less severe in LGBTI relationships than when it happens in straight relationships. Some of the worst domestics I've been to in my time have actually been LGBTI relationships. And I'm sure many of you in your work have probably seen the same thing in a lot of cases. Another one, the more masculine, bigger or stronger partner is typically the abuser. That occurs a lot, especially we've seen over in the US where they've got mandatory arrest laws, that it was always the bigger person or more masculine partner getting arrested. And that obviously doesn't take into consideration all of the other types of abuse that can occur, like emotional and psychological, financial and that kind of thing. Another one is it's easier for LGBTI victims to leave abusive relationships than it is for their straight or married counterparts. Violence in LGBTI relationships is a mutual fight. And lastly, same-sex couples are equal and therefore cannot be victims. So some of the statistics, one study shows, a lot of these are from the US and Canada, and some are from Australia, but one study shows that LGBTI relationships suffer from higher rates, being 25 to 38% when compared to heterosexual relationships. And several investigations estimate that nearly 50% of all same-sex relationships involve some degree of domestic violence. Lifetime prevalence is significantly higher among bisexual women when compared to lesbians, and then heterosexual women. And men in same-sex relationships are just as likely to experience domestic violence as heterosexual women. So it's been found that the true nature and extent of DV suffered by LGBTI people remains largely hidden, as there's very little data and research which exists on the prevalence of DV experienced by people that identify. And whilst the focus on the issue is growing, there's still a general acknowledgement that the violence is generally largely underreported, under-researched and under-responded. There's a recent Victoria study that found just over 14% of respondents who'd experienced DV in same-sex relationships had actually reported the abuse to Victorian police. So it just goes to show really that just because incidents of DV involving LGBTI people aren't being reported, it doesn't mean they aren't happening. It could just mean that no one knows about them or the victims aren't confident in reporting them. So I guess it's not until the community are confident in the police and support services that they'll report the violence to police or seek assistance from support services. So therefore, the more confident LGBTI communities are that they have support from support services and the police, then the more reporting there will be of the incidents. So many people ask me why I'm so passionate about the work that I do in DV and the LGBTI community. And it may come as a surprise, but I'm a prime example of how DV can affect anyone. So I was actually in a DV relationship myself just for over 2 years. And despite my exposure through DV through my work as a police officer, I still failed to recognise it or even denied what I was experiencing was domestic violence. There was times that I felt so unsafe that I'd hidden the knives in the kitchen, had the garage door open with the keys in the car ignition, ready for a quick escape if I needed it. But yet I was still trapped in this relationship. There was times where I actually wished that the perpetrator would physically assault me so that I had a clear indicator of DV, which would give me a reason to leave. It wasn't until one day I completed a DV checklist, which I'll show you shortly, and nearly ticked off every box that it wasn't until then that I realised what was happening was definitely DV. So it just goes to show how much of an influence a perpetrator can have over someone and their ability to recognise DV and their abusive behaviours, even if you think that you've got good knowledge of it. So having lived through this experience, failing to recognise it, going through the court process of having to apply for a DV order, going through the reporting process with police and seeing how daunting it could be, I wanted to use the unique position that I'm in to help make a difference and a bit of a positive change when it comes to LGBTI people's experiencing, recognising and responding to domestic violence. So that's the checklist just there that I was speaking of. Like I said, it was a bit of a light bulb moment, and it's a great resource for people if they think they might be in an abusive relationship but they're not sure. It can be found relatively easily by Googling domestic violence relationship checklist, but otherwise my details will be there at the end. Just feel free to get in touch with me and I can email it through to you. But a lot of people still to this day, I'll go through it shortly, but still think that DV is only physical. And that's why it's great. This sort of resource is great because they can actually see what behaviours they've changed or what they've been doing around their partner and how that might then correspond with being in a domestic violence relationship. So why do victims in LGBTI relationships not identify their experience as DV? So people in LGBTI communities may not identify themselves as being in a DV relationship, like we just spoke about. Often it's seen as being a proper problem of heterosexual relationships with men abusing women, and they're also not likely to see themselves as experiencing abuse or being an abuser if they can't identify with the portrayed characteristics of domestic violence in the public eye. I guess men specifically are taught from early age that they can't be victims, and this message is reinforced by contemporary media and marketing campaigns where womenise the victims and never the men. And we then have men therefore either don't identify themselves as being a victim because they don't think they can be, or they're too embarrassed or humiliated about being a victim and are therefore reluctant to report. There's a number of factors that negatively impact upon LGBTI relationships. The first one is that LGBTI people generally don't have or have not grown up around any LGBTI relationships or role models. Thankfully, that's changing these days. They can also suffer from internalized homophobia, which can affect their relationships. And with same-sex marriage not being legal in some countries, this can further undermine their relationships and cause further stress. LGBTI relationships can also be impacted by toxic masculinity. There's many definitions for this, but one is where it's described as being the expectation that men are strong, showing emotion is incompatible with being strong, and therefore men cannot be victims of abuse, or talking about it's shameful. As a result, they feel too embarrassed to report the violence to police or seek assistance. So throughout an abusive relationship, the victim's generally told they're stupid, that they're to blame for the perpetrator's behaviour, and anything bad that happens is their fault. They face internal struggles and find it hard to put themselves out there because they're constantly being put down, and are therefore hesitant to report in case they are again invalidated by police or support services. So I guess it's pretty hard for a victim to find confidence when they're constantly in a relationship based on power and control, and they're receiving these constant messages of being worthless. This can lead them to question if the perpetrator is actually right or not, and they can also hold the belief that if they go to the police, that there's a chance police will reaffirm what the perpetrator's been saying. So there's many behaviours and dynamics that are unique to DV in an LGBTI context. Some of those using outing of sexuality or gender identity as a method of control, isolation from LGBTI friends, community events and licensed premises, verbal abuse related to gender identity, controlling medication for either HIV medication or access to other treatments like hormone therapy. There's actually a specific one for HIV positive people where they can have a partner threaten to or actually disclose their partner's health status to friends, family or colleagues. I've actually had that one happen in the Valley before. Or the other way, have the verbally abuse their partner by saying that they're diseased, sick or unclean, or other inappropriate comments about their illness to undermine their partner's confidence. Another one is ridiculing the other person's expression of sexuality, gender or intersex status. So why might LGBTI people be hesitant in accessing support services and reporting domestic violence to police? LGBTI people don't want to generally come out or identify themselves as being LGBTI to police or support services unless they're sure that they'll be recognised and acknowledged. There's a fear of discrimination from police and support services if there's no specific advertising that their organisation is a safe place for LGBTI people. And some believe that the stress of reporting is actually greater than the abuse itself. One victim in New York City that I spoke to said they'd actually rather risk being stabbed by their partner than to go through the stress of reporting. and having to go through the court system. So research in the US and Canada showed that some LGBTI victims have reported being arrested instead of the perpetrator, which I spoke about briefly before, sometimes due to the assumption that the bigger or more masculine partner must be the perpetrator and the smaller or more feminine partner must be the victim. That can be another reason why people don't report. Victims generally have already experienced traumatic events and they're not willing to go through another one by reporting and going through the criminal justice system. Like in a lot of cases, it's a big unknown for everyone of what they're actually walking into and who they're going to speak to and whether they'll be treated properly. Some members might not report as they're unaware of what defines a DV relationship. This is largely due to the fact there's a lack of education and awareness around DV and social attitudes that can sustain these behaviours in relationships. And also the myths and stereotypes that we spoke about before can make it more difficult for victims of DV to come forward to service providers, including police. And in some cases, victims are actually aware that there's no specific support agencies for male and trans victims of DV, and therefore they don't report the abuse, knowing that they're not going to be properly supported, unfortunately. So on the screen at the moment, there's a few other ones there. Briefly, I guess I've spoken about most of them. One big one that comes up often is the fear that their sexuality or gender identity would be exposed to their family, friends, or workplace. Whether that be places in small communities where the police know everyone and know families and they think that everyone's going to talk and that's how they'll find out, or whether it be through the court system that they fear that they'll go to court and people will see them there. So that's another big one that comes up a lot of the time for me personally. They believe police won't be able to look past their sexuality or gender identity and actually see them as a victim, or they feel too embarrassed or scared. So the specific ones that sort of pop up, not just that are related to police specifically, rather than community support agencies as well. Obviously, we've just been through earlier the history of conflict between police and the LGBTI communities. History of police targeting LGBTI people, which was sort of seen in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and probably a lot earlier. The perception of interpersonal and institutionalized homophobia and heterosexism. That's a big one for the police. Everyone sort of looks at the police as a sort of very tough macho environment and no one having sort of any empathy for any LGBTI people. Thankfully, that's not the case. But I guess for the liaison officers now and for police in general, one of our things is being able to gain that confidence from the community and show them that that's not who we are. LGBTI people fear they may be ridiculed or harassed by police because of their sexuality or gender identity. And like I just said before, involving the police can risk being outed. So there was actually research conducted in New South Wales which demonstrated even people who felt supported by law enforcement in reporting violence experienced an initial reluctance to contact police as a result of the perceived or institutional or interpersonal homophobia. Many victims of domestic violence in LGBTI relationships may feel uncomfortable with or even scared of reporting abuse to police, and as a consequence, the reporting rate for DV in LGBTI communities is believed to be very low. So, like I was saying, to ensure our policing services are available to all members of the community, that's where our LGBTI liaison officers come in. We'll speak about that shortly. I'm sure in the occupations that we're all in, we have some sort of knowledge of domestic and family violence. I'll just run through a few of the main sort of signs now. You might suspect that a person you know is a victim of DV. Some of the indicators, they can be intimidated or frightened by their partner or withdraw or be reluctant to speak. They might be anxious to please their partner all the time. tell you their partner constantly follows, rings, texts them, wanting to know where they are, what they're doing, and who they're with. Being regularly criticised or verbally put down by their partner in front of other people. So their partner's jealous and possessive, accuses them of having affairs with other people. A big one that comes up quite often is referring to their partner as having a bad temper or being moody, especially when they've been drinking. And another is having bruises, broken bones, or other injuries which they claim as a result of falls or other accidents, and saying that their partner controls money. So on to LGBTI liaison officers. You can see in some of the pictures there, that's sort of the community events that we go to and the things we do. Our aims are to establish and maintain effective liaison between the police and LGBTI communities, and enable appropriate policies and strategies to be developed to ensure the delivery of an equitable service across the state. Roles and responsibilities. We're responsible for building and maintaining relationships with local agencies associated with LGBTI communities, including events, providing access and support when requested by individual members of LGBTI communities, supporting investigations by other police that impact upon a member of the LGBTI community. A great example of that is the murder of Mayang Presetto in a domestic violence incident in Tenerife about 4 years ago. Through that investigation, I was contacted by the homicide squad and assisted them in gaining access to transgender support groups and other organisations like that they wouldn't necessarily know existed without the liaison officers having those sort of relationships with the community. We improve awareness of LGBTI community needs to police members within the districts and assist the station community crime reduction officers to develop strategies for effective responses to emerging trends and issues occurring with LGBTI communities. So that one particularly, one that comes up not so much anymore since the invention of online dating apps, but historically with community, like with beats and things like that. LGBTI liaison officers would assist in sort of educating community members about the use of beats, what's not appropriate, what's unlawful, safety and that sort of thing, and work with councils and things like that to make the place safer for all of the community to use. So if you have any LGBTI clients that are hesitant in contacting police, I would recommend you encourage them to contact an LGBTI liaison officer. Contact details for LGBTI liaison officers can be found by searching LGBTI on the Queensland Police website. I've added a video which you can look at the end of the webinar. There's Tales from the Other Side. It's a production that was done in New South Wales by the Domestic Violence Support Agency down there. It presents stories of survival from those who have experienced domestic violence in LGBTI communities, and talks about their personal experiences of domestic violence, strategies for survival, challenging the myths about DV, and identifying sources of support. One thing that I didn't touch on was making your own services more accessible and friendly for LGBTI clients. I guess when you look at the likes of the support services, so for example, the main ones in Queensland are the Men's Line and DV Connect. If you go on to DV Connect, previously, if you not to single them out, but they're the two main ones that that are referred to people. If you go onto their website, there's some small sections on same-sex relationships, which can be found there. But there's nothing that indicates what training their staff have undertaken. So it wasn't until I actually rang them one day that they told me that their staff have all undertaken LGBTI awareness training prior to commencing work there. So that sort of thing is a great thing to advertise on your websites or your brochures, just to say, hey, we've all had training, we're aware of these sort of issues that your communities might face. And that can allow people to be a bit less apprehensive of contacting the services. Things as simple as putting a rainbow flag along with, a lot of the time services will put Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander flags on their websites to indicate that they're trained and friendly to those people. A lot of places now actually add a rainbow flag to the end of that, just to say that they've undertaken some training in LGBTI awareness and LGBTI people are welcome at their services. Because without having those visible indicators or something written in the sort of about section of the websites, it's quite difficult for people to know, and it's sort of a bit of a lottery when they ring on whether or not they'll be supported and whether or not the staff they're calling there are aware of their particular needs or the particular things that they might have faced. We've got a bit of time, so I will tell you, I guess, a bit about myself. There's another video that was linked to the webinar called It Gets Better. The It Gets Better video came about, we published it August last year. It's had over 2.5 million views worldwide. It reached London and Canada and the US and Singapore, and it was a fantastic response. But it demonstrates, I guess, firstly, it demonstrates the Queensland Police's commitment to the LGBTI community, but it shows that police are real people. We're part of the community. You'll hear the personal stories of LGBTI members of the police and show you some of the struggles that LGBTI people can face, why they can be hesitant in revealing their sexual orientation or gender identity to you or other services, and why they might be apprehensive in seeking support. Generally behind every single LGBTI person, there is a story of, I guess, confusion initially. Shame is a big one. And I guess this video it was a big indicator to youth to sort of say, look, we've all had these struggles. Things can be tough when you grow up, but things do get better, and sort of shows that even though we might be police, we've still had the same sort of struggles as them. Personally, I came from a family of cattle and grain farmers in Western Queensland near Goondiwindi. And when I was a teenager, like I said, I was at boarding school, but I found myself having feelings for guys, and I thought it was normal for these sort of things to happen going through puberty, and it was just a phase that I'd grow out of, or if I ignored the feelings, they'd go away. I didn't want to be gay. Everything I'd ever heard about gay people through my life had generally been negative. Examples of that which were quite common, I'm hoping they're not these days, but back through my childhood, the ones that used to always hear were all gay people have HIV or AIDS, and all gay people are pedophiles. And it was only in primary school that homosexuality was decriminalised in Queensland, and like I said before, the World Health Organization removed homosexuality from their list of mental disorders. I guess I couldn't see myself as being gay. I wasn't like the people that I saw in the movies. The only sort of people back in that day, I'm making myself sound like I'm 100, but the only people visible back then in my youth were movies like Priscilla, Queen of the Desert and Rocky Horror Picture Show. And while they're great movies, I couldn't see myself being like those people. So I completed school and I went through college, continued to deny these feelings, and I guess it was one of those things. I felt like I was the only person that felt that way, and no one else was going through that thing. It's pretty isolating, and that's the sort of negative history which can leave young LGBTI people feeling isolated and alone and unsupported. And that's why, I guess, those feelings when you're growing up like that, that's what can stop people from wanting to, stop people from coming out to support services and police, because there's sort of been that history through growing up that I guess there's a perception of homophobia, or you never know, the next person that you come out to may be homophobic or may in some way assault you, abuse you, or something like that, not treat you appropriately. And that's why, still to this day, there's that can be why there's such an underreporting of these sorts of things. I guess one of the big takeaways from today would be obviously I think you've got access to the PowerPoint show. Just sort of know what those barriers are that people can face, and for your own sort of agencies, just having those sort of visible identifiers to say that you are LGBTI friendly or aware can go a really long way to helping someone actually have the confidence in seeking your assistance. That's about it. So any questions, feel free to type them through now, but my contact details are there. If you want to get in touch, feel free to send me an email, and if you want to view the full report on my Churchill Fellowship, you just Google my name and Churchill Fellow.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thanks for a great presentation and for sharing your personal experiences as well. That hopefully will no doubt resonate with people that are watching today. So just a reminder, you can send your questions through to Ben while he's here with us. So you can type those into the question box on the GoToWebinar control panel on the top corner of your screen, or if you've got a microphone, you can raise your hand and we'll see that hand come up and we can unmute you if you wanted to ask your question via the microphone. So Katrina sent through a comment. So just looking at the criminal code, so section 208, which makes an offence for a person under the age of 18 to engage in anal sex, was repealed in 2016, and the age of consent was normalised in Queensland. So is that your knowledge as well, Ben?
Yes,
yep.
I do normally have that on the, sorry, I just took it out because I thought it was getting a bit long.
Thanks, Katrina. That's
but thank you.
Very good. We'll make sure that gets in there next time. Yeah. It's good to have a group of lawyers watching your presentation. So Melissa, thank you for your comment as well. So Melissa's just thanked Ben for sharing the presentation, your story and experiences, and your work and role is really appreciated, which is lovely. So Amber from Victoria, so obviously legislation is going to be different, and I'm not sure how much similarity there is with the police services across the states of Australia. But Amber's just mentioned that she's aware that police are state-based, but do happen to know if there are any differences in LGBTI support from police in Victoria.
Victoria Police have got their GLOW program, the Gay and Lesbian Liaison Officer program, which has been running, I think, around a similar time to Queensland. The states are quite similar in regards to sort of LGBTI interactions with police. Their program is quite similar to ours. So, yeah, look, support I think would be pretty much exactly the same. I know there's some other support agencies, sort of non-government organisations in Victoria that have got a fair bit of funding down that way, which is specific to LGBTI victims. But I haven't done a huge amount of research on that one. But yeah, I would suggest if you want some more information on that, get in contact with one of the GLOWs down there, they're called. It's pretty easy to find if you just get onto the internet and search Victoria Police and then GLLO. That will bring you up with a list of all of the different liaison officers around the districts down there, and they'll be able to help you out with some more specific information. And I think that goes for Chrissy as well.
Looks like we've got a lot of Victorian people watching today. So just while those other questions are coming through, and we do have still another 10 minutes, so plenty of time if you wanted to ask anything today about domestic violence and LGBTI communities. So Ben, you talked about some statistics and some research that you'd completed. So would you be fine for us to share some of those sources on our website? Definitely. Where you got that research from, because it is a bit of a research gap, and so if there are some papers or articles that people might want to have a look at, we'll pop those up on our website as well. We'll also put a link to the Churchill report on our website so that you can easily click through to that if you wanted to have a bit more of a detailed read, and those links to the videos are already up there if you haven't had a chance to look at them. So definitely have a look at those videos. Unfortunately, just with the GoToWebinar software we use for these webinars, the internet and the software really just don't cooperate well with playing videos in a live way. So please do check out those videos afterwards. I might also just remind you that there's that DV checklist as well. So make sure you do a quick Google search for that one, or you can contact Ben and he will be happy to provide that as well. So Chrissy's just asked if you know the statistics of DV deaths in the LGBTI communities. I'm not sure if you hold that information in your head.
Unfortunately not. There's not a huge amount. The unfortunate thing is, I don't know what it's like in the other states, but Queensland, I can talk about, there's no statistics kept on domestic violence in LGBTI relationships. So there's no sort of, when we're going to DV incidents, or when DV orders or applications are coming onto our systems, there's not a box there that says this is a same-sex or LGBTI relationship. So unfortunately, none of the statistics are actually kept on how many incidents are actually LGBTI related. So the ones that I sort of become aware of are the ones that get reported to me from officers, specifically out on the road. They'll come and see me and say, there's been an incident involving a same-sex couple, and I'll sort of keep note of that. But aside from that, statewide, there's nothing that actually records it. And there's been a bit of debate, not so much in Australia, but in the US, on whether or not those stats should be actually kept. Some people are saying it's an invasion of privacy and that will be treated differently if those stats are kept. And then other people are saying that they should be, we should keep those stats, because then we can respond to the issue better if we know what the problem actually is. So that's obviously something that's that was in one of my recommendations in my fellowship, and whether that's taken up is, we will wait and see. A lot of them have been taken up, which is great. It's LGBTI DV is sort of only just sort of coming to the forefront a bit now in the last even year or two. I know that there's some marketing campaigns that are just about to come out, which should be good, and that could lead to some more reporting and some more sort of changes with those sort of record keeping policies.
Thank you. We're very data driven in community legal centres, so it's always good to have those stats, and it'll be really interesting to see what comes of that. Too. Yeah. At the moment, it's sort of just people's stories and experiences as workers and support services in the sector. Amber's just mentioned that the link for the Keep Safe video doesn't quite work, so I'll just double check that that's all working and pop the correct link up on our website after the presentation. And there's also a question here. So is there specialised support within the service, or is it part of the LGBTI liaison officer's role for people who have experienced discrimination or violence from police based on their gender, identity or sexuality? So good question.
I wouldn't say specialised support. That would be a great place for liaison officers if people don't feel, if something like that had happened and they didn't feel comfortable in reporting that to just any police officer or police link, then yes, that would be a great place for a liaison officer to sort of step in and assist them in taking that report, and then obviously those reports then go through to our Ethical Standards Command to investigate from there. But it's just a great thing for the liaison officers is they can sort of help with that initial hesitation and get people into report.
And do the liaison officers follow through with that kind of, like they'll continue to work with the person who's made that kind of report?
Thankfully, I've never had it happen.
Well, that's good.
I like to say, but yeah, definitely. So examples of what I've done. So I'm probably one of the most active ones because being in the Fortitude Valley, everyone just automatically thinks liaison officer gay, Fortitude Valley, I'll ring there. So one of the biggest ones I get normally is just phone inquiries, people not wanting to ring up and sort of out themselves and say, I'm gay, this has happened. It's just phone inquiries saying, I've been on an online dating app and this person's now harassing me. What are my options? Or this neighbour called me a hoof, or that's one that's quite regular. What can I do about that? And we sort of get them in touch with either support agencies or get them in contact with the Anti-Discrimination Commission, or if there's a criminal element to it, then obviously we will commence an investigation or get them in contact with a local officer to commence that investigation. But yeah, they're the main sort of ones. Or if there is some sort of hate crime that occurs, we're generally made aware of it and we'll make contact with the victim, see how they're travelling, see what sort of support we can offer them from a liaison officer point of view, and get them in contact with specialist LGBTI support services that can assist them, like the LGBTI legal service, for example.
Thank you. So the LGBTI legal service obviously are one of our members in Queensland, and there are some other community legal centre agencies or branches or outreach locations that are popping up around the country as well, who are designed specifically to assist with LGBTI people, which is really great to see. So we've got maybe another few minutes if you do have any last questions that you'd like to send through. I might, while you're doing that, just mention that for our webinar program next year, we're hoping to bring over an LGBTI agency, whether that's the legal service or a partner agency, to deliver some training specifically on working with LGBTI communities and clients. So do keep an eye out for that, because I think that's certainly overdue and hopefully will assist in making your service more accessible and LGBTI friendly as well. So I think maybe that's looks like all the questions we've got for today. If you do think of anything else you'd like to ask Ben, you can either flick an email over to me and I'll forward them on, or Ben might be happy to take questions as well by email or by phone with his contact details on the screen there. So on behalf of everyone who is wildly clapping and cheering in front of their computer screens, thank you, Ben, for presenting today. It was a really thoughtful and comprehensive presentation, and I'm certainly going to go and have a read of your report now, because I've been meaning to do that for some time, and watch those videos. So thanks, everyone, and thank you, Ben.
Thanks very much.